Sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one everyone else should be listening to. Let us know in the comment section below. Have you ever misjudged someone based on what they looked like, only to discover their story left you speechless? Donald Madison wiped a smear of grease from the control panel in the generator room with slow, deliberate care. His grip on the rag was firm, knuckles steady, not from age, but from decades of control honed in places too far and dark to speak of. Every movement he made was efficient, no wasted energy, no useless motion. The kind of efficiency that didn't come from janitorial training videos, but from muscle memory, carved into the bones of a man who had lived 100 lives behind closed doors. He moved without speaking. No one asked him to talk, and no one expected much more than a nod or a polite morning, sir. At the Naval Amphibious Training Base in Coronado, janitors weren't part of the elite. They were background noise. Donald didn't mind. Being invisible suited him just fine. He paused as his mop bucket sloshed over the side, a trail of soapy water bleeding onto the polished floor. With a quiet sigh, he pulled a spare towel from his cart and stooped, cleaning it before the next rotation of boots stomped through. That's when the first voice rang out, a voice thick with entitlement and louder than necessary. "Yo, Dawson, check out old man Stealth over here. Think he was a ninja in another life?" Donald didn't look up. He knew the type. Loud to cover insecurity. Lean builds with puffed chests. Recruit types who hadn't seen a real firefight but spoke like they ran Black Ops for breakfast. Reed Dawson elbowed his buddy Kyle Brennan, both of them still dripping from the pool deck after a disastrous bud/swim evolution. "Bet he was SEAL Team napkin. Wipe and vanish." Dawson snorted, grabbing a protein bar from his gear bag. Brennan laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "He's always here, though, like a damn ghost. Think he sleeps in the mop closet." Donald continued wiping the floor. Same hand, same pressure, same rhythm. The corner of his mouth tugged upward. Not enough to be called a smile, more of a twitch. Almost like muscle memory again. "I bet you he's never even held a gun," Dawson said, loud enough for the echo to carry. "Much less fired one." Donald stood. Slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't look at them. He just turned, wheeled the bucket around the corner, and disappeared down the service hallway without a word. That should have been the end of it. But Commander Eli Torres watched it all unfold from the second-floor mezzanine. He was mid-conversation with Senior Chief Donna Hayes when his eyes narrowed. "You know who that is?" he asked her, his voice low, almost reverent. Hayes followed his gaze. "Janitor?" Torres didn't answer immediately. His lips pressed into a line, and the next words out of his mouth came with the weight of history. "That's Madison. Donald Madison." Hayes blinked. "The Donald Madison?" He nodded once. "Last of the founding ghosts?" She looked down toward the now empty hallway. "What's he doing here?" "Cleaning," Torres said simply, but there was something in his voice that made the word sacred. Downstairs, the mood was different. Dawson was still laughing, holding court like he'd just delivered a State of the Union address. "I swear, man, if that guy could fight, we'd have seen it. But, nah, he just kept mopping. Total NPC." Brennan leaned against a gear locker, watching the direction Madison had disappeared in. Something about it didn't sit right with him, but he didn't say anything. He was the quieter of the two. Smarter, too, though he hid it under sarcasm. He opened his mouth to speak, but Commander Torres's voice sliced through the room like a blade. "Rec Dawson, front and center." The room froze. Torres descended the stairs without breaking stride. His uniform was crisp as always. His boots sounded like verdicts hitting the deck. Dawson straightened, but couldn't hide the confusion on his face. "Yes, sir." "Did you make a comment about Mr. Madison just now?" Torres asked, his tone calm, but there was no mistaking the storm beneath. Sir, I may be in jest, sir. Just a harmless joke." "Harmless?" Torres turned. Senior Chief Hayes. What was your evaluation on Madison back in Kabul? Hayes didn't miss a beat. 14 extractions, 0 casualties, hostile zones, nighttime infill. Guy vanished into places we couldn't find with drones and came back with intel that saved lives. More than once. The silence in the room was deep now, suffocating. Dawson's smirk faded. You owe that man an apology, Torres said, his voice like steel. But more than that, you owe him your silence. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I didn't know. That's the point, Torres interrupted. You don't know anything, and until you do, maybe you think twice about disrespecting the men whose shadows you train in. Without waiting for a reply, Torres walked away. Behind him, Hayes followed. The recruits stared at each other, the levity gone. And down the hallway, in the closet behind the generator room, Donald Madison stood still in the dark, his eyes closed. He'd heard every word. But tomorrow morning he'd be back on the floor again, mop in hand. No medals, no speeches, no change. Just a ghost in the halls. At 4:30, Donald Madison unlocked the rear storage building behind the obstacle course with the same exactness he'd shown every morning for nearly 4 years. He did it quietly, as always, and in the exact same sequence. Shoulder nudge, double-turn key, lift on the doorframe before swinging it open to avoid the creak. The other staff joked that he had hacker-level muscle memory. What they didn't know was that Madison had once dismantled Soviet field locks in the middle of sandstorms while being hunted by foreign nationals. Old habits didn't just die hard, they didn't die at all. The storage building smelled of musty canvas and motor oil. Madison took inventory of the climbing ropes that needed replacing, lined up the gear bins by size, then pulled out a pressure washer to clean the mud off the tires piled beside the rappel tower. He didn't need to do this. No one asked him, but he still did. As the sun began to rise, the base started to stir. A distant series of shouted commands broke the silence. Recruit units in formation, hoo-yahs and boots pounding dirt. It was a rhythm Madison knew deep in his bones, like an old song you don't forget the lyrics to, even after 20 years of silence. He paused mid-spray, setting down the washer to listen. His eyes didn't close, but they softened. For just a moment, he wasn't 68 years old. He wasn't a janitor. He was a ghost again. Moving through jungle brush in silence, breathing through his nose so the mist wouldn't betray him. The memory shattered when a door slammed behind him. Madison, a voice barked. It wasn't cruel, just formal. Commander Torres. Madison straightened, turned. Morning, sir. Torres nodded, arms crossed over his chest. He stepped further into the storage shed, glancing around. You're already 2 hours ahead of the rest of us. Old man's insomnia, Madison replied simply. Torres didn't smile, but there was a flicker of warmth in his eyes. You could have taken retirement. You had every clearance for it. No one would have blamed you. Not in my blood, Commander. Clearly, Torres said, his tone turning. He took a step forward. I want to do something. I've been thinking about it since yesterday. Madison shook his head slowly. Don't. They disrespected you. They're kids, Madison said. Let them be kids. Torres looked like he was holding back fire behind his eyes. Kids who want to wear the trident don't get to act like they're above respect. They'll figure it out. Torres exhaled. He took out a small black notebook and scribbled something. At least let me fix your ID. It's still listed as civilian maintenance. Madison reached out and gently pushed the notebook down. I'm exactly who I need to be, son. That word son hit Torres like a body blow, not because it was patronizing, but because it was spoken with that rare mixture of respect and authority, the kind that only came from someone who had the right to say it. Torres didn't press further. You're a stubborn bastard, Madison. I know. They stood there in silence for a beat longer. Lunch is on me today, Torres finally said. Mess hall. No excuses. Madison nodded once, and the commander disappeared through the door. He went back to scrubbing the tires. By 700, the first wave of recruits began running the obstacle course. Madison sat quietly on the edge of the low wall separating the equipment bins from the sand pit, pretending to read a clipboard he didn't need. But he was watching. He always watched. Dawson was struggling. He took the wall too fast and landed on his ankle wrong, gritting his teeth but refusing to quit. Brennan, oddly, kept stealing glances at Madison, as if trying to crack a code only he had just begun to notice. The others blew past, laser-focused on proving themselves, none of them yet realizing that proving oneself sometimes meant acknowledging what they didn't know. Later, as they broke off into smaller units for swim prep, Hayes walked up with a cold water bottle in hand. "Brought you something," she said, holding it out. Madison looked at it like it was a relic. "Thanks." She stayed standing next to him for a moment. "That was you at Oxai, wasn't it?" He took a slow sip of water. The radio chatter. 6 ghosts, no shadows, that was your team. Still, he said nothing. "God," Hayes whispered. "We all thought it was legend." He turned slightly. "We were never ghosts to be remembered." She nodded slowly. "Well, someone should remember." Madison stood and stretched. "You remember long enough, it'll start feeling like a weight. Better to carry silence sometimes." Before she could reply, Brennan approached, fidgeting with his towel. "Sir, Mr. Madison." He started awkwardly. Madison looked at him, eyes patient but unreadable. "I just wanted to say, I don't think I really understood who you were, and I'm sorry about yesterday." Madison looked at Brennan for a long second. Then he extended the water bottle he'd barely touched. "Thirsty?" Brennan took it, unsure but grateful. "No need to say anything," Madison said. "Just earn it." "Earned what?" Brennan asked. Madison pointed toward the pool. "That trident, and the kind of silence that speaks for you." Brennan didn't reply. He just nodded and jogged back to his group, the bottle still in hand. Madison watched him go, then turned away again. No medals, no flags, no speeches. But maybe, just maybe, the echoes were starting to find the right walls to bounce off. Dawson was chewing the inside of his cheek as he stared down at the line of swim candidates kneeling at the edge of the pool. He couldn't focus. Couldn't breathe right, either. Not since that hallway moment yesterday when the commander had stopped dead in his tracks and spoken about the janitor like he was a war hero out of a classified briefing. He wasn't used to guilt. Not like this. Brennan nudged him. "You hear what Hayes said this morning about Madison?" Dawson grunted. "Yeah, like everybody else." "No. She told me he used to clear paths with a knife in his teeth. Silent drop missions. No comms. No backup. One of those vanish behind enemy lines guys." "Mops floors." Brennan shot him a look. "You ever mop a floor like it was war?" The whistle blew before Dawson could answer. They hit the water like missiles, the cold slicing into their skins as they launched into the dive. 600 meters. Underwater navigation. Half breath hold, half terror. Donald Madison watched from the shadows of the pool deck bleachers, arms crossed, the sun outlining the curve of his faded gray ball cap. He wasn't on duty right now. He'd finished early, just so he could sit here. Watch. Measure. Recruits were struggling. One surfaced too soon and got flagged. Another zigzagged out of bounds. Dawson actually looked strong in the water, powerful, direct. Brennan was just behind him, legs kicking in near-perfect cadence. The instructor pacing the edge of the pool didn't acknowledge Madison, but when he passed close, he slowed just enough to murmur, "You trained better men than this. You see it?" Madison's answer was as calm as it was low. "I see too much." He didn't elaborate, he never did. By the end of the set, only 3 made the mark. Dawson crawled out of the water, coughing, collapsing onto his side. Brennan helped pull another recruit up, nodding at Madison. The janitor gave him nothing but a slight, respectful incline of the head. It was enough. Brennan beamed, like he just passed Hell Week. Later that day in the chow hall, the recruits sat quieter than usual. Word had spread. Not rumors this time, stories. Documented things. Mentions of Madison's name on old Navy citations, redacted op logs, even a frame in the museum hallway. No name, just a blurred photo of a man standing behind a rescued hostage in Baghdad, barely visible behind the shadows. They compared the photo to Madison, and they saw it, clear as day. Commander Torres entered the chow hall at exactly 1300, grabbed a tray and sat next to Madison without ceremony. "You're a damn ghost, you know that, right?" "Thought we established that." "You told Brennan to earn it?" Madison didn't look up from his tray. "I tell them all the same thing. Difference is who listens." Torres glanced toward the recruit tables. Dawson sat apart from the rest, stirring his food without appetite. "He's chewing it hard. They should watch." "You ever gonna talk to him?" Madison finally looked up. "What would I say?" Torres shrugged. "Something about forgiveness. Or maybe silence." "Hell, you're the one with the ghost stories." Madison stood, emptied his tray, and left without another word. That afternoon the compound fell into routine again. Weapons maintenance, classroom lectures, ruck march prep. But something in the atmosphere had changed. There was an edge to the silence that followed Madison now, not just indifference, but reverence. Not fear, but respect, earned the way SEALs understand it best, through proven hardship. At dusk Dawson found himself walking the long corridor behind the equipment lockers, the same hallway where he'd first mocked Madison. It was empty now, quiet, but not in the peaceful way. The door at the end was ajar. He knocked once, softly. Inside, Madison was oiling a row of rescue cables on his bench. He didn't look up. I shouldn't have said what I said. The words fell into the room like broken glass. Madison didn't stop moving his hands. He kept wiping the cord slowly, methodically, his motions whispering of a discipline that hadn't dulled. "I thought you were just—" Dawson paused, struggling. "I didn't know." "Knowing doesn't excuse judgment," Madison said quietly. Dawson stood there, his back straight, but not out of defiance this time, out of discomfort, embarrassment. "I was trying to prove I belonged here," he said. "Figured if I acted like I already earned it, no one would notice how scared I really am." Now Madison looked up. His eyes weren't cruel. They were steady. "You want the truth?" Dawson nodded. Madison leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the bench. "Everyone is scared. That's why training works. It doesn't make you fearless. It teaches you what to do when fear tries to speak louder than you." Dawson breathed through his nose. "How do I move past it?" "You don't," Madison said. "You move with it, carry it, let it sharpen you, not break you." The silence lingered between them, but it wasn't heavy anymore. "I'll get back to my unit," Dawson finally said. Madison gave a nod. "See you at the pool." As Dawson exited, he turned at the door. "Sir." "Thank you." Madison returned to his work, but something in his shoulders relaxed, if only for a moment. Outside, the last light of day dipped beyond the horizon. The recruits would soon be asleep. But the compound and the man who watched over it would not. The graduation ceremony wasn't meant to be grand. SEAL Bud/S completion wasn't capped with a marching band or fireworks. It was quiet, intentional, reserved, meant for the few who made it through, their bodies battered and spirits sharpened. There were no speeches, just names called, badges given, hands shaken by men who rarely smiled but always meant it. Donald Madison stood at the edge of the ceremony grounds, just outside the white chalk border lining the bleachers. He was in his faded work shirt, sleeves rolled, keys at his belt. To most onlookers, he looked like staff maintenance sent to make sure the folding chairs stayed upright. That suited him just fine. Dawson was front row in the graduating unit, uniform pristine, his posture no longer inflated with arrogance but anchored in humility. The past few weeks had aged him, not physically. He still looked like the same wiry, buzz-cut recruit, but inside something had settled. He didn't look side to side for validation anymore. He kept his eyes forward, his jaw still, his breath calm. Commander Torres stood at the podium, calling names. Brennan, Kyle. One step forward, one firm handshake. Dawson, Reed. The name echoed, and for a brief second Madison thought Dawson wouldn't move, but then he did, purposeful, strong. As Torres reached out and clasped Dawson's hand, he leaned in. "Proud of you," he said. Dawson blinked, the words almost not computing. "Thank you, sir." As he turned to rejoin the line, something caught his attention near the rear edge of the ceremony. Just a flicker, a shadow. Donald Madison stood with his arms crossed, nodding once, so small a gesture it could have been imagined. But Dawson saw it. The recruits were dismissed. Applause broke out in brief, polite bursts from family members seated at the back. The rest of the base began to dissolve into movement. Officers chatting, trainers lighting cigars, instructors shaking out tight shoulders. Madison turned to leave. That's when it happened. Commander Torres was in the middle of a conversation with two visiting admirals. He'd been speaking mid-sentence, recounting the statistics of this class's unusually high pass rate, when his eyes caught on something. They widened slightly. His spine straightened. He stopped talking, and then he saluted. Not to an admiral, not to a flag, to the janitor walking away. The surrounding officers followed his line of sight. Several looked confused. Others looked stunned. One senior chief's jaw went slack. Then Hayes stood. She didn't say anything, just brought her hand to her brow in a crisp, clear salute. Then another, and another. The gesture rippled through the crowd, like a tide returning to shore. Recruits turned. Families paused. Donald Madison stood still. He didn't return the salute. But he did stop walking. For the first time in years his eyes filled, not with grief or rage or pain, but with something soft, something grateful, something he'd spent decades never expecting to feel again. A recognition. Dawson stepped forward, out of line, not caring about protocol. He walked straight to Madison, stood tall, and held out his hand. "Sir," he said. Madison looked at the hand, then at the young man in front of him. He took it. They shook once, firm, final, no need for more. "You earned it," Madison said. "Because of you," Dawson replied. The sun dipped low behind the compound, casting long shadows across the parade ground. Later that night, the mess hall was unusually lively. Officers mingled with new graduates, the air filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of stories told and retold. Donald Madison sat at a quiet corner table, a glass of iced tea in front of him. Not alone. Brennan, Dawson, and a few other graduates had joined him. Not with words, just presence. They didn't ask questions about his past. They didn't need to. One of them slid a tray toward him, a slice of cake, nothing fancy. There was a note written in napkin ink. "Thank you for showing us what quiet strength really looks like." Madison chuckled softly. "Waste of a good napkin." "You still keep everything in order," Brennan grinned. He didn't answer. Commander Torres raised a toast from across the room. "To the ghosts who kept us safe, and the legends we didn't recognize in time." Glasses clinked. Madison didn't raise his. But he nodded. And in that moment, he wasn't just a janitor. He was every mission never spoken of, every life saved in silence, every page blacked out in the archives, every echo that had finally found its voice. And as the night moved forward, with stories shared and barriers fallen, Donald Madison remained exactly who he was always meant to be. Not a man forgotten, But a man finally seen